welcome to part 6. In part 6 we will do animation, so that will be the springy effect. As you let go of the slider, it springs down to a straight line, and as you click it, it springs up to this curve. So to begin with, we will go back. Let's just make sure everything's working. Perfect. We will go, and I'm also gonna untoggle the debug, and I'm gonna untoggle the performance overlay. Also, I want to get rid of the title bar. We do not need that. Perfect. Okay, so within the wave slider file, we are going to create a new class called wave slider controller. So this will be controlling the state of our sliding. Well, not only our state, it will control the animation and at what position, what state the animation is in and what state the drag is in. So to begin with, we can define a animation controller. Call this controller, and then we will also define states. So we can create an enum class, enum slider state, and within this we will have 4 states: starting, resting, sliding, and stopping. I think they're self-describing, but starting would be as you click, it starts the animation. Resting would be a straight line, sliding would be sliding, and stopping would be the state going from leaving the drag and it stops. It's this bounce back animation to a straight line. So continuing with the wave slider controller, we have the controller. Why is this the file variable? Okay, it must be initialized, fine. Wave slider controller. This dot controller. Next we will have a final, actually no, this won't be final, slider state. It's private variable called state, slider state, and we will initialize it to be resting. Then we will invoke the controller, set it equal to an animation controller vsync. What is the problem here? This controller, just give me a second. Oh, we do not want to pass in the controller. We want to initialize the controller over here. What we will be passing in is the vsync. For that, we will say at required is the ticket provider vsync, and animation controller vsync equal to vsync. Perfect. And the type parameter vsync is annotated with at required, but only name parameters with default. There we go. Name parameter now. I think this is an optimization. Use this instead of empty constructor. This won't be empty. Okay, so next up, sorry for that. For the controller, we will make use of the cascading functions and say add listener. Then we will define a function called onProgressUpdate, and we will define a listener for add status listener. This tutorial will not go into detail about how to do animations. It's more of how to implement it and use it within a painting class or custom painter. There are very good tutorials out there to go into detail, but for general reference, this add listener calls the listener every time the value of the animation changes. So once we start this animation, once we say animation forward or animation start, this listener gets called every frame. And then we will call this function. Add status listener is essentially when the status of the animation changes. So the animation has a lot of changes, a lot of states. So starting to finished to a couple more that I'm not too sure about. So yeah, void on progress update. And what we want to do is, for our wave slider controller, we want to extend change notifier. And this is just so that we can actually get notified of changes within the app. And then here we will say notify listeners, or not changes within the app, but changes within this class. So as the listener, or as the animation changes, it calls on progress update, and on progress update notifies the listeners. And then void on status update. Animation status. So as I said, that's the states or the status of the animation. If the status equals the animation status of completed, then we will call on transition completed, and then we will define the function called on transition completed. And within on transition completed, we will say, this is a bit down the rabbit hole, we will say if the state equals to slider state stopping, this is just double checking, then we will set the state to resting. And then we will define this function as well. Void set state to resting. And this will be a public function. Okay, so within set state to resting, we are literally going to set, as it says, we're going to set the state, slider state equal to resting. We're going to add a status listener. This will call on status update. If the animation status is completed, then we will call on transition completed. On transition completed will check if the current slider state is stopping, meaning that it's going from the top to a straight line. If it's during that state and the animation is completely done, then our state should be resting, meaning our line should be a straight line. We also want to define a couple of additional methods. Okay, and then we want another method called start animation. This does not need to be public. Start animation, the controller dot duration equals duration milliseconds 500 milliseconds, and controller dot forward from 0, and then notify listeners. And start animation we will call from within set state to stopping. Start animation. So these public methods are essentially what we're going to use within our slider, like our wave slider, to say what state the slider is in. When we do a drag update, it's going to be sliding. When it's drag end, it's going to be set state to stopping. On drag start, it's going to be the startup animation. And then finally, if it's finished with the animation, this notify listeners on this on status update will be called. If it's completed, we will set the transition to be completed, and the state will then be set to stopping. We also need to define a couple of getters. For one, we would like to get the progress of the controller, and we would like to get the state. Get state. Perfect. Okay, let's save that. Nothing's broken. There are no errors. Okay, then going up into our wave slider, extend this with a single ticker provider, state mixin. This is for the animation controller, and we would like to define a wave slider controller, and we can call this slide controller, and we would like to override the init state, and we would like to override the dispose state, or the dispose method. Within this, we would like to say the slider controller. So this gets called when this method gets, when this wave slider state gets initialized. Wave slider controller, and we will pass a vsync of this. This is where the single ticker provider state mixin comes in. And then within the dispose, we will say slider controller dot dispose. Cool, so we've done our initialization and we've done our cleanup. Next, within the on drag state start, we will need to say slider controller dot set state to start, and then within the on drag update, slider controller set state to sliding, and on end, you guessed it, slider controller dot set state to stopping. Next, what we'd like to do within our painter class, we would like to pass in the final double animation progress and a final slider state, and for this we want to import wave slider, and we would like to say at required this dot animation progress and at required this dot slider state. Fantastic. And then we should have an error. We need to also pass in it here, slider controller animation progress, and slider state, slider controller dot state. And an error, the getter progress was called on null. Okay, the debug was a simple hot restart. The progress variable wasn't initialized yet, so just a hot restart. Okay, next what we need to do is within the wave painter we want to specify the the actual animation, and also do the actual animation calculations. So within this paint method, first what we need to do is we need to define a switch statement to say what state we are in. I'm quickly going to implement this switch statement, and then after I'm finished, I'll explain. While I'm doing this, I'm going to create a couple of additional methods to define the painting that will happen based on the current state of the application. So currently it's doing nothing, but it's also not breaking, so that's good. What we want to do now is within the paint sliding wave, that is something that we currently know, is we're going to call paint wave line, perfect, canvas size this, and within paint wave line we are going to define the wave curve definitions. We are going to say wave curve over here, and then we're going to exclude that, and then going back to the implementation, final references, there we go, we are going to say wave curve definitions equals to calculate wave curve definitions size, perfect, and then we can pass in these definition values. It's a bit long name, I'm going to just say curve definitions. Reformat, perfect. Okay, and then paint sliding wave, we are going to call, okay, let's see if it actually works. It doesn't. Okay, let's see if the issue is because of the state or because of something else. Paint sliding wave. Okay, it's because of the state. So state is sliding. Let's print the state. So it's starting, stopping, it's never sliding. Starting, stopping. It's also at no point equal to resting. Okay, give me 2 seconds while I debug this. Okay, it's debugged. I'm sure some of you probably saw this error and were like, what are you doing? Perfect. So as we are dragging and sliding, we get our value. Okay, next up, we would like to do almost the same, but with animation for the startup wave and for the stopping wave. So let's begin with the resting wave. That's easy. For the resting wave, all we need to do is we need to go to this, where is it? I just deleted it. This paint line, and cut this out, and we want it to be within this resting wave. Okay, cool. So our state is resting. We are not touching it. It's not animating. Animation stops. It should be resting now. It doesn't. It's interesting. So let's go see if we can debug this. Set state to resting. Set state to resting on transition completed. If state is stopping, then set it to resting. It is stopping. When do we call stopping? Final references. On drag end. On drag end is called, and our state is stopping. It's just never set to resting. Okay, give me 2 seconds. Okay, so I found the issue. While I was looking for the issue, I also noted that set state to start should also call start animation. So when the state goes to start animation, i.e. the animation goes up, and when state is stopping, when it goes down, start the animation as well. So I forgot to add this. The actual issue is a simple one. Within this init state, we need to add a listener to say when a change happens, we want to call set state. Perfect. So now if we leave it, let's do a hot restart. Perfect. We needed to do a hot restart because this was within init state. And perfect. After the animation duration, we call the slider state of resting. Next, what we would like to do is define the animation for the startup wave. So for this, we will do a wave curve definitions. We will call this line, calculate the definitions, and we will interpolate between the height. So we will say wave height. The height is what we will be playing with to have the bouncy animation. We will say loop double, starting from size.height. So because this is the startup, we're starting at the bottom, going to the top. And then we will say line.control_height. So if the line is at this point, the control height will be there. If it's there, the control height will be over there. And then we will say define an elastic curve, an elastic out curve. And we will say transform based on the animation progress. Format that. Perfect. And then what we want to do is we want to say the line.control_height equals the wave height. Currently we can't do that because it's marked as final. So for this, we don't want it to be final. And let's find the implementations. Find all references. This is the one we want. And then we can call paint wave line, canvas line. Perfect. Let's see if we have an animation, and we do. We don't have a stopping animation yet, so let's go to stopping. We essentially want the exact same thing. I'm gonna copy paste all of this, format, and instead of going from, well, essentially the top, but going from the bottom to the top, we're going to go to the top to the bottom. So we are starting from the line control height, going to the size.height. And that should be it. And there we have it. We have a bouncy effect. Quite easy to do. Okay, and that's the end of the animation part. A quick playthrough. As you can see, bounce, 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 bounce. Sorry for the loud clicking. Bounce, 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 bounce. And there we go.